Hello, this webinar is titled The Vertical Separation of Power, the American Constitutional System. The American concept is one of a republic made up of state republics that are in turn made up of county republics that are in turn made up of self-governing individuals. You see, the U.S. constitutional system is an entire system. It's not just the U.S. Constitution that establishes a federal government with 20 enumerated powers. It's an entire constitutional system. This vertical separation of power is possibly the most important part of the American constitutional system. Let's take a look at what Thomas Jefferson says on the distribution of power in the American system. It is not by the consolidation or concentration of powers, but by their distribution that good government is effected. Were not this great country already divided into states, that division into states must be made that each might do for itself what concerns itself directly, and what it can so much better do than a distant authority. Every state again is divided into counties, each to take care of what lies within its local bounds. Each county again into townships or wards to manage minuter details. It is by this partition of cares descending in gradation from general to particular that the mass of human affairs may be best managed for the good and prosperity of all. So let's take Jefferson's words and unpack this graphic that I showed at the beginning. So you've got a federal constitution for the national government. And within that national government, you've got three branches, checks and balances, and horizontal separation of powers. But then you've got 50 state governments and a vertical separation. Initially 13, represented here by the 13 colonies, but 50 state governments that also have three branches of government, checks and balances, and horizontal separation of powers. And then below that, each state has either dozens or even 100 counties in some states that likewise are mini republics with three branches, checks and balances, and horizontal distribution of power. You have cities, towns, and villages under that, and then people, which are tens of thousands of families and self-governing individuals within counties, city, towns, and states. Well, where did Jefferson get his ideas? Well, Jefferson, turns out, looked to the Hebrew Republic. John Adams said this. He recorded what Jefferson proposed for the U.S. seal. This was what Jefferson said: "The children of Israel in the wilderness led by a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And on the other side, Hengst and Horsa, the Saxon chiefs, from whom we claim the honor of being descended and whose political principles and form of government we have assumed." And the Saxons were actually putting into practice the same concepts of the Hebrew Republic. And here's an artist's rendering of what that seal might have looked like if it had actually been implemented. Well, what were these ancient ideas for the Hebrew Republic? Well, if we look in Exodus 18:22, we see that Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, was providing him some advice. "But select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens." This is what that looked like. There was Moses at the top that was carrying way too much responsibility. And Jethro's advice was to distribute the power. Select 600 leaders that would be over 1,000 family groups, then 6,000 leaders over 100 family groups, 12,000 leaders over 50 family groups, 60,000 leaders over 10 family groups, and then you'd have 600,000 families, 3 million people, all practicing self-government. With this framework, all the self-government would take place at a family level, and most of the government would take place at a local level, with very limited amount of power yielded upward. So the Hebrew Republic was a model for our American constitutional system. Again, Jefferson, "Were not this great country already divided into states, that division into states must be made that each might do for itself what concerns itself directly, and what it can so much better do than a distant authority." It was so important that Jefferson thought states, that is, smaller republics, would have had to have been created for our system to work. Patrick Henry echoed these sentiments. He made the case that the national government would only interact with the state governments, that state governments would only interact with county governments, that county governments were the ones that would interact with towns and the people, So he was articulating this principle of liberty that only local governments interact with the people themselves directly. So to expand on this concept just one last time, national government, state governments, county and city governments, and then self-government, but this visual doesn't even give you the full scope. You need to consider that just 13 states are represented here in this image, but if you were to add to the state governments here visually, how many state governments you would have, and then the proliferation of county and city governments, and then all the individuals and families that were designed to be practicing self-government, what you have is a nation of self-governing individuals, and that is the American constitutional system. One last exciting thing about all of this ancient advice from Jethro to Moses came through ethnicities of color. I would suggest to you that people of all ethnicities can find their story in the American story, as this ancient advice was put into the American constitutional system. At uscivicstraining.org, we've got a whole section on ethnic studies, people of color finding their story in the American experiment. This is another exciting part of the American constitutional system. My name's Craig Seibert. Thanks for listening.